Donetsk, Luhansk, Donbass, Ukraine. These are names you've been hearing for the last couple of days, particularly since last night. But the name you are hearing most of all is Vladimir Putin. Because what has Vladimir Putin done is to completely upend the post-Second World War order or balance in the world. Now we know that till 1989 there was a Cold War on and there were two blocs, etc. But America was the dominant power. And with that domination, America and the NATO on one side, and the Soviet bloc was seen as an underdog, and China was sleeping most of the time and lately rising slowly. In that situation, it was generally believed that the world had seen a lot of smaller wars, including some prolonged ones like, say, Vietnam or in Afghanistan, both involving the Americans, wars between India and Pakistan, which were mercifully short. So there were about 75 to 80 wars of some size in this period. But generally, the world had remained stable. In fact, scholarly data put out at the beginning of this century showed that at the beginning of this century, the number of fatalities to military conflict were lowest in history. That period was called Pax Americana, right? A kind of epoch where America was dominant even during the Cold War, and the world by and large maintained stability and peace. Countries didn't invade each other too much. They did in some cases, and I'll mention those, but not too much. And countries did not change their borders too much also under military coercion or force. Now, that Vladimir Putin has upended completely, because what he's done, he's completely ignored NATO, threats from America, threats from other European countries, France, Germany, who also happen to be big buyers for stuff he has to sell, particularly oil and gas. He's gone around all of them, and he has now, in a way, moved into Ukraine. He's moved into Ukraine. He's also delivered this almost an hour-long speech, which I was listening to late last night. It was a harangue, and I was listening to translations, but it was basically a charter of grievances. This was to say that we, great Russians, have been robbed of all this, our glory. He went on to talk about the fact that what has happened today is an insult, or what is happening vis-a-vis Ukraine is an insult, not just to the Soviet Union, but also to the Russian Empire. Now, there's a lot of people on the left across the world, but particularly I notice in India, because there is such strong anti-Americanism or residual anti-Americanism, that they seem to be getting some vicarious delight out of what they see as Putin's humiliation of America. But the fact is that they are people of the left who swear by anti-imperialism. And here is a leader who's actually harking back to imperialist times. To that extent, he's now become just like Xi Jinping and Xi Jinping's China, which is also talking nostalgically about the boundaries in Qing dynasty's times, to say that we want to restore those boundaries. That's why Arunachal Pradesh is South Tibet. That's why these islands are ours, etc., etc. So this is Putin's rise in the same vein. That is the reason I say that he has turned the basic equation that came into being after 1944, 1945. Now it's a new situation, and frankly, while there are discussions in UN Security Council, it can do very little to him because he's got his veto and the Chinese are there. There is no way that the rest of the world has that kind of leverage with him except by enforcing massive sanctions. And those sanctions would then include refusing to buy his oil and gas, which means the Nord Stream pipeline will become useless or dry, at least for now. It will be a big price for Europe to pay, and Europe, as we know, is lazy, spoiled, entitled. It's unwilling to pay a price for anything. But there will be a price, and Russia will be punished. So we don't know what will happen there, but he has now challenged the existing order in the world. Now, what exactly has happened? We'll tell you a little bit about what has happened, and then I will draw some conclusions in terms of some pointers as to what it might lead to and what it means right now, and also where does India stand on this. That's a very fascinating thing as well. So first of all, we know that he recognized two of these sort of autonomous separatist states or regions controlled by separatists. These are Donetsk and Luhansk. They are also called Donbass because they are seen as areas in Donetsk basin. Now, what is Donetsk basin? Donetsk basin, it's actually a coalfield ridge that runs along the Donetsk river. So, generally the area is called Donbass. Now, the two regions which separatists had been controlling since say 2014. 2014 was a big turning point. That is when the Russians invaded and took over Crimea. Now, we know that the newspaper, The Hindu, used that expression, invaded, and Russian embassy objected very strongly, and the Hindu took down that little point. But the fact is that Russian forces moved in. After that, they held some kind of a referendum, and referendum showed that a large majority, this was a referendum under Russian control, wanted to stay on as a part of Russia. So at that time, a lot of people in east and southeast Ukraine also rebelled, and they wanted their own autonomous states. Now, Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union for a long time. 1 in 5 of Ukrainian population is Russian speaking, is originally Russian. But in the eastern area and southeastern area, that number is much greater. So that region sees itself as being closer to Russia than to Ukraine. So that centrifugal pressure is there. After 2014, obviously with the help of the Russians, Russian troops, Russian paramilitaries, in some cases Russian mercenaries, or what is called as the Wagner Group. We've talked about this in the past, both in the context of Ukraine and Sahel region in Africa. So these rebel groups organized themselves and they took over key positions and government offices in the capitals of Donetsk and Luhansk. And since then, they've been asking for autonomy. What Russia has now done is, Vladimir Putin has recognized these as independent sovereign republics. Only he has done it as yet. Everybody is watching the space for China. But if you see China's statement at the Security Council, it's very measured. I don't know, because once again with the Chinese, you cannot say what they might do tomorrow, but doesn't look very likely that other countries will be in a hurry to further recognize these as republics. But this has been done, and reactions have been sharp. So at the Security Council meeting, I will give you a few reactions. There is Sergei Kislitsia, who is the Ukrainian ambassador. He refused to remove his mask at the Security Council meeting. Ukraine is not a member this year, but he was invited to speak because the special session pertained to Ukraine. And he said, I'm not removing my mask because I'm afraid of COVID-19, but because of the virus that has no vaccine, the virus that is spread by the Kremlin, right? This is the Ukrainian ambassador at the Security Council. Now, with Ukraine, what's happened is, one thing we must remember, that when Soviet Union broke up and these new republics came in, many of those republics had stockpiles of nuclear weapons already kept there. So essentially, these were Ukraine, Belarus in the neighborhood, and Kazakhstan sort of far away. All three nations decided to give up their nuclear stockpiles. All three nations decided to give up their nuclear stockpiles in return for security guarantees for their countries. These guarantees and this return of nuclear weapons, this was secured through what was called as Budapest Memorandum of 1994, Budapest being the capital of Hungary. So they gave up their nuclear weapons and also signed the non-proliferation treaty. So they all became good boys, good girls, whatever you call them. Now there is a feeling that, if only we hadn't given up those nuclear weapons, we might have been more secure. And this might also now worry other former republics who will think that, look, we either have the choice of being a Russian vassal, which means if not a member of the Soviet Union, at least ceding part of our sovereignty to them, or maybe looking for other options or getting throttled by them because some of them also happen to be landlocked, right? Also, the question will be, what are the security guarantees worth? And then that's the question that Ukrainians are asking. Now, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's the US permanent ambassador at the UN, she said, look, what is this nonsense Vladimir Putin is talking when he says that his troops who've gone into Donbass area are peacekeepers? She said, we know who they are. This is nonsense. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, former comedian, he got elected in 2019 with 73% of the vote in the final round of voting. So very popular, very pro-Western, is really keen. His promise is to make Ukraine into a genuine European country, which is what Putin doesn't like. He's spoken out, and he's spoken out very strongly. Plus, he has said that he and his forces and his people will defend Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine is not a tiny country. By area, it is the second largest in Europe. By population, it's the seventh largest, which is not small. So it's about 4.5 crore people. It's a sizable number of people, and it's been estimated that about 4 lakh Ukrainians, they may not be regular soldiers, but they have learned enough military skills to fight to defend their nation, and they are very committed to it. So Ukraine for a long time has been talking about turning itself into a porcupine. So when the Russians come in, they will meet a fate. Their plan is that might be worse than that of Russia's or America's in Afghanistan. And Putin also doesn't want to get caught in that. So Zelensky has spoken out strongly. And then you see the strongest voices coming from the Baltic leaders. Baltics are small republics, small populations, which also became independent as the Soviet Union broke up. That is Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So there is a Lithuanian Prime Minister, Ingrida Simonite, who says Putin just put Kafka and Orwell to shame. There are no limits to dictators' imagination, no lies too blatant, no red lines too red to cross. So you can see that there is a great deal of anger and insecurity among former republics, particularly the European ones. Now, it is true that Russia is not the only one, or Soviet Union is not the only one to have interfered or invaded the other countries. Americans have also done it, and I will give you a list in just a minute. But watch some of the things that Putin said. Putin said it's a fallacy that Ukraine ever existed as a nation in history, right? He says Ukraine was created by Russia, more specifically by Bolshevik communist Russia. And he goes on to curse Lenin in his speech. He holds Lenin responsible, the Constitution of 1924, etc., for having created the Republic of Ukraine, which he calls a myth, right? So he is harking back both to the glory of the Soviet Union, but also the Russian Empire, right? And he says that's lost, and he's blaming the communists and Lenin and the Bolsheviks for it. Then he says, what is Ukraine? Ukraine is historically, culturally, spiritually. Now that's a new formulation. Historically, culturally, and spiritually, an integral part of Russia. So imagine, how does it sound to you if you are a Ukrainian living in Kyiv, a Ukrainian patriot, nationalist? It's a bit like that old Hindi song, Tan se tan ka milan ho na paya to kya, man se man ka milan koi kam to nahi, right? That at least our hearts meet spiritually, historically, etc. But he's not limiting himself to that, because he's going from man se man to tan se tan also, because he also wants to take over the body. Now, this area of Luhansk and Donetsk itself is quite sizable, as you can see on the map, but the fact is that the areas that they imagine as their republics, that is Donetsk and Luhansk, is much larger than what the rebel forces control now. And these rebel forces are now assisted or led by Russian forces. So will they now try and reclaim all the other area, or claim all the area that they claim as part of their republics, which is now defended by Ukrainian soldiers? Will Putin do that? If he does that, this will lead to a full-fledged war. So that is a space that needs watching. Once again, while we listen to Putin, there was also a meeting of his National Security Council, which was quite telling, besides the fact that he ticked off his foreign intelligence chief more than once. and he was shaking, and his voice had tremor, and he was stuttering. But there is another passage there from that Security Council meeting which is very interesting. That is Viktor Zolotov. Now, Viktor Zolotov is the head of National Guard in Russia. He's also a former bodyguard of Putin's. He gets up to say that, look, recognizing these states as sovereign republics is fine. You can do that, but this is not enough. You have to do more, because remember, we Russians no longer share our borders with Ukraine. We share our borders with America, implying that Ukraine and Ukrainian government is nothing but an American puppet. And then there are visions of American missiles sitting there. It's not very different in imagination from, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis, that these are Soviet missiles sitting too close to our territory. So that same kind of imagination is being used here. So again, Putin goes on to say, what is this? Ukraine trying to become part of the West and so independent of Russia and so distinct from Russia. And he says, if our ancestors had heard this, they would not believe it. And then he says, even we don't want to believe it. That's how it is, right? That is Dadagiri at its brutal best. Now, I told you that this is not the first time a bigger country, a more powerful country would have invaded another. So Soviet Union itself, in 1970s, we know they invaded Afghanistan. Before that, they had invaded what used to be Czechoslovakia, right? They also invaded Hungary in the 50s. But Americans are not to be left behind. They invaded Panama in 1980s. CIA overthrew the elected government of Guatemala. They've been playing all kinds of games in Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, because they see those in their neighborhood and impinging on their strategic interests as much as Putin now sees Ukraine. So we must be balanced and fair in this analysis. And even besides these, America sent armies into Vietnam, then Iraq, and Afghanistan. Now, Vietnam, you might say, was not an invasion. That was to fight on behalf of one side, right, or regime of one side. But the other two were straightforward invasions, whatever the excuse or reasoning behind it. Why is Putin doing it? Now, the analysis that I read, and I think I agree with some of this, is that there is a feeling among him, Xi Jinping, particularly those two, that US and Europe are right now at their weakest since the Second World War. Europe's just lazy, getting too old, not willing to stand for anything, becoming really self-pampering welfare states, and not investing enough in their armed forces, hoping the Americans will come and protect them. That is something that Donald Trump used to keep reminding them of, saying that you have to start paying for me defending you, and that will be several tens of billions of dollars. I don't know what bill he had trotted up for that. But the fact is that barring France and Britain, other European countries have not invested in their defense, and they are incapable of defending themselves. And if Americans are weak or tired right now, then Xi Jinping and Putin see an opportunity for themselves. That is the reason they think that right now we can throw out all old treaties, all old agreements, and take decisions and enforce decisions based on military power. There is also a belief that there is a decline in the power of liberal democracies, and this is the era of strongman dictatorship, starting with Xi and Putin in that order. So the feeling seems to be that there is a new multipolar order coming up which is unstoppable, and there is a shift in power to authoritarian regimes that support traditional values. When you say traditional values here, then you see what Putin means by Russian Empire and what Xi Jinping means by Qing dynasty's boundaries. Now a muscular, couldn't care less Russia is adding to the power of China, of rising China, to support this idea that this world order has changed. Now, has Russia won this war or lost this war? For now, Russia has won a battle in the sense that these two states have been recognized as sovereign republics. Ukraine will have very little chance of getting these back going ahead. But the other view that I read, in which I also see some logic, is that maybe Russia has lost the one instrument it had of acquiring greater control over Ukraine. And now it will not be able to do so unless it rolls in its tanks and takes over the country, fully invades and conquers it, which is not going to be easy and unlikely that Putin would do that. But once again, I'm not wagering anything on that. But short of that, what is it that Russia has gained? Putin has saved face, particularly with strong men within his midst, saying that, look, I was indulging in brinkmanship all this while. It's not as if I retreated without achieving anything. I have achieved this. I have given Biden a bloody nose. I made Macron look stupid, so close to his elections. I made Germany look good for nothing. And I have shown my power. I have shown Europe who's the boss. So this is enough. But what is it that he loses? That's where we have to understand what is the meaning of Minsk II protocols. Now, Minsk is the capital of Belarus. Now, Minsk is where negotiations were held in two rounds after the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea and the outbreak of fighting in east-southeast Ukraine. That fighting had cost nearly 13,000, 14,000 lives. It was a kind of trench warfare that was going on. Prisoners of war were taken. Russian troops were involved. So various European powers got together and they got together to work out a formula. The powers that got together was Ukraine, Russian Federation, and something called the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that is OSCE, with France and Germany acting together in what is called as a Normandy format. So they came up with an agreement, Minsk II, that everybody signed, whereby prisoners of war were exchanged, a ceasefire was brought in, active conflict stopped. The basic deal there was that Ukraine will be able to reintegrate the territory which had declared independence. That is these two, Luhansk and Donetsk. In exchange for that, Ukraine will make certain changes in its constitution whereby these two republics or these two regions will have a great deal of autonomy. They will have their own police. In fact, that the former militants who come join the mainstream now, they will all become policemen. They will elect their own judges or select their own judges, etc. They will all get a full amnesty. But more than that, they will get a veto on Ukraine's defense and foreign policies. Now, everybody knew that these regions will be controlled by the Russians. So, in effect, Russia would have taken away control over Ukraine's defense and foreign policies, and in effect, Ukraine would have lost its sovereignty. So, Minsk II was an instrument available to Russia to take away Ukraine's sovereignty. Now, obviously, Ukraine didn't like it. Ukraine obviously saw it as a deal signed under duress. So, Ukraine would have preferred to first integrate these and then see what they want to do with constitutional changes. Russians were insisting that you make the constitutional changes first. Now that these two are already recognized as sovereign states, there is no particular compulsion on Ukraine to keep its own side of the bargain, that is to give up its sovereignty to Russia, which is what Putin really wanted. In fact, I saw
Nassim Nicholas Taleb,
who is a global opinion leader. He tweeted the word Anschluss last night. Now, Anschluss was when in 1938, Hitler decided to annex Austria into Germany, saying, you are German people, right? So I will annex you. And he gave an ultimatum, an order to the ruler of Austria, first of all, to give all power to Nazi party members, and then essentially give up power and sent his troops in. In fact, you might have seen some of that politics play out, or some of that era play out, if you saw the movie Sound of Music. So that was the annexation of Austria. Some of the conditions that Putin's Russia has put before Ukraine actually remind you of Anschluss. We know exactly what's happened. We know that at least for now, Pax Americana seems to be over. We also know that China-Russia connection seems to have become much stronger, because it's quite evident now that Putin waited till the end of the Winter Olympics in China to take this action. That was to give the Chinese comfort, which means he must have shared this plan with Xi Jinping earlier. So that has got cemented. Now, where will this take Putin's Russia? Putin's Russia has problems. Putin's Russia, it's much stronger than before, than might have been under Yeltsin or any other after 1989. But it's a unidimensional power. It's a unidimensional power in the sense that it is predominantly a military nuclear power. What sets it apart from others is that there is a there is a willingness to use military power. There is a willingness to play hard power, and there's a willingness to taking risks. But there is a limit to how far that can take you, because there are lots of economic limitations. Because even in terms of what Russia can sell to earn revenues or income is mostly energy and materials and commodities, minerals. Now, any sanctions is going to cause Russia a lot of damage there. Of course, Russia would say that I have a very large market already in China, and even the Indian market is not going to go away. But the fact is that this will be a big setback for Russia, so there are limitations to how much Russia's power can grow. Why has India taken the view it's taken? That's very easy to understand. First of all, nobody wants to take a panga with Russia and Putin. So if you look at India's military hardware, about 60 to 70% even now. Now there is a lot of diversity that's coming, but 60 to 70% still is of Russian origin. In fact, a lot of it is of Soviet origin. It predates the breakup of the Soviet Union. So that needs spares, ammunition, maintenance, technology, etc., etc. Also, there is a lot else shared. Russia's is also a voice which India does not want to see rising in a matter that is adverse to India's interests, particularly on Kashmir, Pakistan. Russia also knows how to do squeeze play in India. That's the reason Imran Khan is going to be, or is at least scheduled to be, the first Pakistani Prime Minister to go to Russia after 23 years. The message of that contact is not lost on India. So India has to be careful, and really, I think our foreign minister said this also, for the Europeans to expect that India will now come out to their defense because they are in trouble with Russia is a bit rich. Because when was the last time you heard any Europeans speak out for India, particularly when India has faced threats from a larger power, namely China? For 2 years, Chinese soldiers are sitting on our borders, and ours are lined up also. It's a hair-trigger situation, but no European country at all has spoken even one word in India's support. That is the reason, as Jaishankar, our foreign minister, also said, he reminded the Europeans that from where we sit, Russia is not the greatest threat to the global stability. It is China.